Hey y'all, it's Miriam and it's time to paint. So grab your paintbrushes and let's get started. I want to share with you 3 tips that you can start using today that will change the way you approach painting forever. Okay, yes, that was a bit dramatic, but they are certainly things that helped me in my approach, and I think you'll find them helpful too. Number 1, let's start with the game changer, adhering to the chroma curve. Now, this one's not just a tip, it's the foundation for bringing your portraits to life. It's the key to really nailing a sense of form and adding that 3-dimensionality we all strive for when it comes to realism. When you're painting areas that get lighter as they project towards the viewer, like the cheekbones, forehead, nose, resist the urge to simply add white as the color gets lighter. This approach will flatten your work. Instead, embrace the chroma curve. I'll show you a quick demo of the chroma curve in concept, and then we'll look at it in practice. This works not only for realistic colors, but also invented or abstract color pieces as well. Here we have a sphere. Now, let's say I've painted the midtone color here, and I want to get to the highlight here. It would be reasonable to think, oh, let's add white. On the surface, this makes sense. White lightens colors, and it certainly looks like the color is moving straight towards white on the graph. But let's actually look at what happens on the journey from midtone or shadow to highlight. Look at the path it creates and notice that it's not a straight line, but rather a curve. This is important to think about because it'll affect how you mix your paints. Let's look at a few real-life examples, and then we'll look at it in practice. When it comes to human skin, there's a lot of variation in color, tone, and value. But notice the still overall curvature as we move into the light. This holds true no matter the skin tone. Now, how does this affect your painting? Well, let's look at what happens when you don't adhere to the chroma curve. This is a rudimentary example, but you get the point. Let's say I want to recreate this sphere, but this time I'm not going to adhere to the chroma curve and I'm just going to add white, meaning I'm going to pick my colors in a straight line here. Boom. It's fine. Looks like a rudimentary sphere. Now let's recreate this sphere, but this time adhering to the chroma curve, meaning I'm going to not only add white, but add white plus a bit of pure color as it gets lighter. Let's check out the difference. Again, this is a really basic and quick example, but can you see the difference? It might be small, but small things like this really make a big difference and make a big impact on your final piece. Here's a work in progress from this week. Thinking about the chroma curve as I'm painting is how I'm able to give my portraits that extra pop of realism and depth while still being pretty loose with everything else. Keeping this in mind also helps me to think 3-dimensionally about my paintings, which is another huge factor in the success of a painting for me. Number 2, figuring out what to paint. Some of the biggest questions I get asked is how do you decide what to paint and how do you transition from painting portraits you find online or whatever to creating work you really love and that you're proud of? Well, in every portrait I paint, there's 3 people: the subject, the viewer, and the artist. The magic for me personally when it comes to painting is when all 3 of these are present and felt. I feel it's often the difference between a pretty painting and an impactful one. Now, how do we honor each one of these? Well, subject? Subject is more than just capturing a likeness to a person. Subject is the story we're telling. It's not only the person, but also the message or the emotions we want to come through in our painting. That all falls under subject. This is where we ask ourselves, what do we want to say? Next is the viewer, or more specifically, our viewer's relationship and experience with our painting. This relationship is shaped by how we as artists choose to present our subject and narrative. Through things like composition or visual weight, we can influence how a viewer interacts with our art and ultimately what kind of emotional response we want to elicit. Oftentimes when I'm painting, I think to myself, where will the viewer stand in relation to my portrait on the wall, and how can I use this to my advantage? Think of it like the difference between passive viewing and active engagement. This is also where artists often ask themselves, so what? You painted a pretty picture. So what? What do we want our viewers to feel? And how can the choices we make when it comes to color, composition, brushstroke, whatever, reinforce that? And third is the artist. Can the viewer see you in the art? Oftentimes in our journey as artists, we strive for perfectionism. And in the process, we end up erasing a lot of the wonderful intricacies and anomalies that make our art ours. People love to see you in your art. For me, seeing the evidence of the artist in their art is like seeing through time. It's a physical reminder that the artist was here. Instead of trying to beat out the things that were wrong in my paintings, I embraced them and ran with them. My inability to stay focused on one task or area for too long, my short attention span when it came to any one media, and my often messy and chaotic nature. Instead of trying to beat these things out of me, I embrace them, and they're often now the things that I'm known for. So, how do you figure out what to paint? You ask yourself, what story do you want to tell, and how do you want your viewers to feel? Every decision you make as an artist after that will reinforce those two questions. Now, a few caveats. One, it's okay if your answers to these questions aren't tangible and concrete. And two, sometimes you just want to paint a pretty picture, and that's it. Sometimes you just want to paint for the joy of it and nothing else. You do it for the act of painting, not necessarily because you have something to say. And that's totally okay too. There's a lot of times where I just go and paint simply for no reason other than wanting to see something pretty on the canvas. This is just helpful for the people who are looking to say something with their work but don't know where to start. Now, last thing, and it's a bit of all over the place, but here's an actual brainstorming session I did a few years ago for a painting. You can see the process of how I'm thinking about the viewer, my subject, the relationship and feelings between the two, and myself as the artist. Okay, last but not least, tip number 3, the importance of visual contrast and juxtaposition. Sometimes the best way to highlight what you're really good at or what you're really wanting to show is by juxtaposing it with the opposite. It's a really fun way to highlight something while also keeping your viewers interested. For example, if you're known for or really want to highlight your use of fun and bright colors, incorporating dull or dark colors in the background can really make the bright ones stand out. If your thing is really well-rendered shapes and forms, you can create a lot of visual contrast by keeping the non-focal point areas really loose. This is one that I personally play with a lot in my work. There's a million different ways you can incorporate this idea into your work. And I'm always trying to think of ways I can add visual contrast, whether it's with my color choices, my brush strokes, subject matter, whatever. It's just a really fun concept to play with and one that carries a lot of visual weight. Here's another quick example. This is actually a book that I have sitting on my bookshelf, and take a look at some of the portraits on the cover. I find the juxtaposition of these, let's see, make sure I get in the camera, these really well-rendered shapes. Let's see all these really well-rendered shapes. I'm doing this backwards, trying to look in the camera. Okay, with these really sketchy ones, see down here, these sketchy, let's see, there we go. Again, I'm backwards, sorry. Okay, all these really sketchy shapes. I find it really interesting. I like the visual contrast of it, and I find this mix of really sketchy lines and well-rendered shapes, I find this more interesting than if they had chosen to put complete drawings on the cover with no sketchy marks at all. Also, this kind of goes back to our point number 2. The hand of the evidence is evident and clear here, and it gives me a more of an understanding of the process and kind of unveils this hidden dimension of time. I don't know. That sounds weird. It makes sense in my head. I wish I could remember the artist that I first heard talk about it, this dimension of time. If I think about it, I'll put it in the comments. But it's really cool. It's like adding a 4th dimension to your work. I don't know. I find it really interesting. So visual contrast. You can find places anywhere to add visual contrast. All right. If you've made it this far through my rambling, kudos to you. Thank you guys for watching. A special shout out to all of my folks over on Patreon for making this video possible. And a big thank you to all of you guys watching right now. If you found this video helpful, let me know in the comments. I always enjoy getting to read what you guys have to say. And yeah, that's it. Keep painting, keep exploring, and I'll see you later. Bye, guys.